huge thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring today's video. Hey, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be doing my April wrap-up. And in the month of April, I read 13 books. You know, it wasn't the best reading month for me, not just in terms of like numbers-wise, because I know 13 books still sounds like a lot, and it is. But this was definitely the month I've read the least of so far in the year of 2023. Honestly, I blame August D. But also just in terms of like the quality of reading, I mean, I did have a few 5 stars this month. Like, I did definitely find a few new favorites, but outside of those few new favorites, it was mostly a really mediocre reading month. I also did, I dyed my hair red this month, if you didn't notice, so that was also another big change. Like, there was just a lot going on in the month of April. I did have 2 reading vlogs that came out in the month of April, so I'll have those linked down below if you missed either of them, but one of them was just a vlog reading new thriller and horror books, and then the other vlog was kind of like reading some anticipated books that were in the thriller and the romance genres. I feel like this month was chaotic as well because I was kind of all over the place with vlogs that I was trying to do, and I was DNFing a lot of things, and just, I don't know, maybe the number of books I read this month is lower because I was DNFing things that I was not enjoying. But however, before we do jump into the wrap-up, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring today's video. You might have heard me mention Scentbird a few times before because I absolutely love working with them, because Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service where every month you can try a new designer fragrance for only $17. So what's really great with Scentbird is that with every fragrance you get from them, this is a 30-day supply of perfume. Like, I don't know if you can see how ginormous this bottle size is, but this is not your typical like perfume size sample. This should last you an entire month. And I think that's so great because it gives you a lot of time to figure out if this is the scent for you. You know, it gives you 30 days to try it, to wear it out with friends, and you can see if you really like it before you commit to buying a full bottle size. It's really awesome because on their website, they have over 600 designer brands to choose from, including some of those big names like Prada and Gucci and Versace. And then they also have some of the indie labels as well, like Confessions of a Rebel. I love that they have perfumes and colognes, and they also have a lot of unisex options. And some of these perfumes that they have on their website are up to $150, and even some of them are up to $300 to $500. And you can sample them with Scentbird at a much more affordable price. They sent me 4 different scents to try out this time, and all of these scents are literally so perfect for spring. We have the Versace Bright Crystal Absolo, we have the Floral Street Sunflower Pop. I'm a huge fan of this one because it's got the bergamot in there. And then we have the Love Me Toast, which I'm also a big fan of this one because it has the rose petals, the sandalwood, and the amber. And then I think this one has got to be my favorite out of the scents. It's this Furla Favolosa, and this one has grapefruit, it has magnolia, white musk. This one just smells like spring to me, but in a really like subtle and like mature way. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it smells so good. So make sure to click the link below or to scan the QR code on the screen and to use my code gabbyreads3 to get 55% off your first month with Scentbird, which is only about $8 for your first month. Can you believe how affordable that is? Thank you so much to Scentbird for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get into the wrap up. Alright, so as mentioned at the beginning, I did have a couple of DNFs this month, so I thought I would go through those at the beginning here. I did end up trying to read Slewfoot. You know, this was a book that I ended up drawing out of my like Patreon prompt jar. The prompt was to read a book that was like really loved by other booktubers, and so I ended up going with Slewfoot because it was so popular last year. And I tried this book, I got 20 or 25% of the way into the audiobook, and I just can't do it. I don't know why this genre, this style of book is just not for me. It's really kind of like fantasy, it's kind of magical, it also has like a very historical setting to it, and honestly, any books that have this kind of atmosphere just literally bore me to tears. Like, I don't know what it is. I try so hard to get invested, but I just can't. Like, I don't know why, I just can't care. I also ended up DNFing The Only Survivors by Megan Miranda, which is kind of a bummer because this is a thriller that I was pretty excited about to read this month, and this one I got about 35% of the way into the audiobook. I don't know exactly how many pages in I got, but I just had to DNF it because I could not care less about what I was reading, and I was just kind of afraid that it would put me into a reading slump, and like it kind of did a little bit, I think. I also ended up DNFing Icebreaker by Hannah Grace this month, and this is another one that I got about 20% of the way into this book before I decided to DNF. I think that I had to DNF this one because I kind of felt right away that I was like getting really annoyed with the characters. It felt very insta-love, and like the the writing, I just did not click with this writing the way that I was hoping that I would. I eventually did find out that this was originally a Wattpad story and then it got turned into a book, and I feel like that makes a lot of sense because I don't know what it is with a lot of the books that were originally Wattpad stories. I don't usually vibe with the writing. Like, there's something about the writing that it feels like, I don't know, I just don't like it that much, unfortunately. So I ended up DNFing this one. I just didn't really like these characters very much. I also did want to mention here before I forget that this month I did work on a Patreon exclusive video with my sister, and it was so much fun. It was like a 30-song prompt challenge kind of video where we get prompts like, what's the best album opener track? What's the best, you know, song to listen to while you're driving, and different stuff like that. And we would give one Taylor Swift answer for every prompt and then one non-Taylor Swift answer for every prompt so that we would have some variety. And this video turned out so freaking cool. It was like one of my favorite Patreon exclusive videos that I made. Like, we just had so much fun with it. And so if you would like to see that, I'll have the link for my Patreon down below where you can check out the video. Alright, so on to the books that I read this month. I thought I would start with the manga. I only ended up reading one manga this month. I swear, it was a really weird reading month for me. It was unusual. And the only manga that I ended up reading this month was Blood on the Tracks Volume 12, baby, let's go! I was finally able to finish, and I'm completely caught up on Blood on the Tracks now. This was the final volume, and I think the next one is coming out either this year or next year. I don't really know, but this volume was absolutely insane. If you haven't heard me talk about Blood on the Tracks, like, it's one of my favorite manga series that I've ever read. It's kind of like a thriller horror situation where this young boy has a really weird toxic relationship with his mother. It's very Bates Motel vibes. And this volume 12, oh my gosh, things just got really unhinged, and it feels like this series is gonna go in a direction that is just like, what the fuck? Like, what is going on? What? And this was a really great volume. Like, I really enjoyed this volume. I feel like especially at the end of it, I was just like horrified. And this one, I don't know if it was like a 4 or 5 star for me. I feel like I need to think about it a little bit more, but I loved it. I freaking love this manga series. All right, so the first book that I ended up reading this month was The Perfect Daughter by DJ Palmer. And this was a book that I was originally reading for this, you know, thriller secret TBR video that I was working on, but I eventually went on to cancel it because this book didn't go super well for me, and then I ended up DNFing 2 of the other books that I was originally going to read for that video, so it didn't end up happening. But this story is about this young girl who has multiple personality disorder, and she ends up murdering someone, and so they have no real motive for her to do it. And this book is kind of about how she's getting locked up in like the mental hospital after the situation, and we kind of follow from the point of view of many characters trying to figure out whether she could be lying, whether or not she actually has this illness, and if she does, then like, what does this mean for their family going forward? And this story was really interesting. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about multiple personality disorder, so I can't really speak on whether or not this was good representation of this illness or not. I feel like with this book, for me, it started off really interesting and I got really invested in the first like 100-ish pages or so, but then after around 100 pages, I feel like the story started to get really repetitive because it was just like the same scenes of like the psychiatrist or like the people in the hospital talking to her and interviewing her again and again and again, and like her personalities sometimes would change like mid-interview, and they would kind of get to interview multiple of her personalities. It was interesting at first, but for some reason it just got to be really like cheesy and cringy to me over time because the scenes just got so repetitive in that way. I don't know, and then by the second half, I just found myself not caring that much and just wanting the story to be over because this wasn't a long book necessarily. It's like about 380-ish pages, but it started to feel like it was so long in the second half. Like, I was just ready for things to wrap up and to be over with. But for me, this one ended up being about a 3-star read. It was okay. The second book that I read this month, which was The Kind Worth Saving by Peter Swanson. Peter Swanson is freaking back, baby. Let's go. So The Kind Worth Saving, if you're unfamiliar, it's actually a sequel to The Kind Worth Killing, which is one of my absolute top favorite thrillers of all time. Like, it's probably in my top 3 favorite thrillers that I've ever read in my life. And so when Peter Swanson announced that he was going to be writing, you know, this sequel, The Kind Worth Saving, I was immediately kind of nervous because that's like a lot to live up to, you know, with that first book, and because his last few books that he's come out with have been massive disappointments for me. So I was just kind of like not really knowing what to expect going into this one, but I am so happy to let you know that this was a 5-star read for me. And like, I don't even know if I could say like, I do think maybe it comes pretty close to The Kind Worth Killing for me. Like, these two are freaking great. And I honestly don't know which book I prefer. Like, that's how good this book was. Like, oh! So without giving too much away about like the plot and like what this book is about, we're basically following this woman named Joan, and she goes to this guy who's like a private investigator, and she says that she thinks that her husband is cheating on her and she like wants him to look into it. And this guy was actually her high school teacher from like back in the day when she was a high school student. And it's really interesting because we follow from this investigator dude's point of view in the present day, but then in the past we do get chapters of Joan when she was a teenager in high school. And I feel like Peter Swanson does what he does so well in this one, is that he just keeps you on your toes. He makes you think that you know what's going on, but you actually have no freaking idea what's going on. And I love the very like subtle twist throughout this book, like where he'll just like pull the rug out from under you and everything about the book will change. And I think that that's what's most similar about this book to The Kind Worth Killing, is like I feel like The Kind Worth Killing is one of the most like unpredictable, like chaotic thrillers, and that's why I really love it so much. And this book felt the same in that way, and it was really cool because there's a point in this book where you do see some of the characters from The Kind Worth Killing reappear in this book, and so that was also really exciting. I do think that The Kind Worth Saving works as a standalone book, but I do highly recommend that you read The Kind Worth Killing first, because it'll be 10 times more fun for you to know some of the characters from The Kind Worth Killing and to see them again in The Kind Worth Saving. Like, it's way more fun that way. And then the next book that I read this month was The Spight House. This one is a haunted house kind of story, you know, and we're following this guy who's a dad, and he has these 2 daughters, and he takes this job where he's gonna have to go to this house that's a spite house, and he's gonna have to stay there, and basically his job is to try and prove that there's like a haunting, or like that there's something paranormal happening in the house. You know, the premise does feel very similar to a lot of things that I really love. Like that premise, it kind of gives me Kill Creek vibes. It kind of reminds me of like The Haunting of Hill House, you know, where these characters are just gonna try to prove that there's a haunting or that there's something going on here. And there were some things that I really loved about this book, and then some things that I really didn't love about this book. I really did love the protagonist. I loved following this dad. I loved how fiercely like protective he was of his daughters, but how he also was like really desperate to provide for them. And I just felt like he was so human, you know, like I just really liked following from his perspective. What I didn't like though was following from so many different perspectives in this book, because we do get a number of character point of views in this book, and I just didn't think all of that was necessary. I would have much rather just followed from the dad's point of view only, because he was the character that I was the most invested in and like cared the most about. I also do feel like, you know, this book did a really good job of like the suspense and like building up to when these characters were going to the house. Then once they were actually in the house, like the scenes when they were actually in the house, I just didn't feel that afraid anymore, and it just kind of got really boring. I don't know, I feel like this is one of those books where it had so much potential, but it just wasn't that scary. Like for a haunted house book, I think I just expected so much more from this, and so it ended up being like just okay for me. I think I ended up giving this one 3 stars. And then the next book that I read this month was It's Me, Charlie, and this is one that I ended up reading because of my Patreon prompt jar. I pulled out a prompt that said read an extreme horror book or an extreme horror novella, and so I just kind of browsed around on TikTok and I found this book that a lot of people were talking about, and I thought I would read this one because this one's only 60 pages, and so I thought, you know, because I don't really know if extreme horror is the genre for me or not. And so I decided that, you know, this one's only 60 pages, right? I was like, how bad can it be in 60 pages? Yeah, I was an idiot. It turns out, I don't know if extreme horror is the genre for me or not, because this was, I don't even know my experience with this book. I actually did, you know, I did vlog my whole experience with this book, so if you want to see me torture myself when I read this, then I will have that link down below. But this was quite an experience. It's just so hard for me when it comes to rating books like this, you know, because technically, if we're technically speaking, this book did exactly what it came to do, right? Like, if you read extreme horror because you want to get absolutely nauseous and disgusted, then like this definitely did the job, you know? Like after reading this book, I was nauseous for like 2 days. I could not stop thinking about this one scene in this book that is so freaking disgusting and disturbing that it rolled my stomach over in a way that I have not really experienced with a book. Like I actually was nauseous. Like it was not fun, because like there's certain books where I get nauseous, like say The Troop or something, which I do get nauseous, but it's not to the extreme where I actually feel like I'm gonna get sick. Like this shit was disgusting. And I think what makes this book especially hard for me is because the whole premise of this book is that we're following this man who gets really obsessed with this woman who's an indie romance author, and he's basically literally like disguised himself, like he has a bookstagram account, right, that he's disguised himself as this young girl to get close to her. And then the story is about how he's abducting this woman, and you know, he thinks that because he reads her erotic books that he knows what she wants in the bedroom. And so a lot of this book is not only really disgusting and disturbing because of this man and like what he does, but it's also like there's a lot of really hard sexual acts of violence against women in this book, and that is definitely like my number one thing these days that is so hard for me to read. And I don't know, I can't get on board with it. I don't want to think about it. It's disturbing, but in a way that like I don't even want to read this disturbing, you know? I left this book unrated because I don't know how to rate it. I don't want to rate it poorly just because it made me uncomfortable, because I know that that's kind of the point, but I also just wasn't a huge fan of the writing in this one in general. Like I don't think it was a very well written book anyways. So like, I don't know, I wouldn't recommend this. I'm not gonna rate it. I would rather just never think about it again, to be honest. And then the next book that I read this month was The Trees Grew Because I Bled There by Eric LaRocca, my freaking king. I love Eric LaRocca so much, and this one is his new short story collection. This one is a collection of, I think it's 8 short stories in this, and this one is a horror novel. It is another horror novel, and this is exactly the kind of horror that I just absolutely love. I feel like something that a lot of these 8 stories have in common is grief and like losing someone you love, and like that is the biggest horror that there is, right? Like that is so terrifying. My absolute favorite short story in this whole collection is You're Not Supposed to Be Here. Oh my gosh, that one is so top tier. Like that's probably one of my favorite short horror stories that I've ever read in my freaking life. Then I also really loved The Strange Thing We Become and The Trees Grew Because I Bled There, the one that the collection's like named after. Oh my gosh, this collection is just so freaking good. There's a lot of stories in this collection too that have some really intense like body horror stuff, and that was a little bit like, ooh, it made me a little bit squeamish, but like in the way that I want horror to make me squeamish, you know? I'm very particular about what I like in horror, I guess, and this was just everything for me. This was so great. I think overall I'm giving this collection 4 stars because there were some stories that I thought were just okay for me, but those ones that I loved, oh my god, I loved them so much. All right, and then next up, I got into kind of a weird reading slump after all of the things that I was trying to read this month, so I decided to do a reread of Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. I mean, it's officially my most reread book of all time. This was my 5th time reading Fangirl, and like it was so perfect timing for me to read this month. This year, if you didn't know, is actually the 10th anniversary of Fangirl. Like Fangirl's been out 10 years now as of this year, and also this year is actually my 10-year high school reunion. Like this May, it's actually going to be 10 years since I graduated high school, which is so insane. 2014 was the first year that I read this book, so it's been in my life for about 9 years now, and it was so great to be able to reread this book again. And like this time that I read it, I literally annotated the hell out of this book, like so much, to the point where it really just makes me want to go back and like reread all of my favorite books again and annotate them even more, because I've always been a huge fan of annotating, but this time I really just like went all out. Like almost every single page has like annotations on it and writing on it, and this book just makes me so happy. I talk about this every time that I read Fangirl, but Fangirl is like my ultimate comfort reread. I don't know what it is about this book that is so comforting to me, but Kath is just like one of my most relatable characters of all time, like that I've ever read. And I feel like every time I read this book, I feel right at home. Like I feel like Kath understands me as a human being, because Kath is super awkward and she like dedicates most of her life to being a fangirl, and she's just so relatable. And I love the relationship she has with her sister, and like her romance with Levi in this book is the cutest shit ever. I just love them so much, and this book just means absolutely everything to me. I actually made a video a couple of years ago now that's just called Why I Love Fangirl, and I just kind of rave about this book for like 20 minutes. So if you want to hear all of my more in-depth thoughts about why this book is absolutely everything to me, I will have that video linked down below, but it's kind of an older one, so apologies about that. And then the next book that I read this month was romantic comedy, and this one, it's interesting because we're following this woman named Sally, and she's a writer on this show called TNO, which is very SNL, okay? It's essentially SNL. She's like a comedy sketch writer on this show, and then it's about a romance between her and this guy, what is his name, Noah, and he's a pop star. He used to be a part of like a boy band when he was younger, and now he's gone solo and he's on his own, and he's like in his 30s, and they're both in their 30s, and it's about how he's gonna be starring on this show for the week, you know, the TNO show, and so he's gonna be the host where he does like a lot of sketches with them, and he's like the musical musical performer as well. And so, you know, she naturally starts to get really close to him during the week as they're, you know, writing sketches together. And I have such mixed feelings about this book because I adored the romance that was happening between these two characters, right? Like, they were so freaking cute. In the first 100 pages of this book, I was like, oh my god, this is gonna be 5 stars. Like, I'm obsessed. It's so freaking cute. I kind of loved the, like, behind the scenes of a show like this. Like, I just thought it was so much fun to read. But then, oh my gosh, this book takes a weird turn where there's a point where it hits like a part 2 after like a lot of pages in, and then it turns into like a lot of emails back and forth. Like, it's just reading emails, which was fine. But then it's weird because in the second half of this book, we get the pandemic, like, out of nowhere. And then it turns into like this kind of, I don't know, the tone of this book just really shifts into something that's kind of sad, and it starts to talk about the pandemic in a really serious way, and some of these characters are dealing with COVID, and it's just a little bit unexpected, and like, I just don't know how I felt about the second half of this book. It just really kind of went off course a little bit. And then the main character, you know, Sally, she has a lot of insecurities to the point where the second half of this book just started to get a little bit annoying to me, like the way that she would behave about certain things. I was just like, oh my god, girl, get it together. She just started to drive me a little bit crazy in the second half. But I think overall I still want to give this one like around a 3.5 or even up to like a 4 star because of how much I love the beginning. Honestly, if I could just rate those first like 120-ish pages or so, it would have been a 5 star. Like, I adored them. I thought it was so cute at the beginning. And then the second half of the book is definitely more of like a 3 star. So like a 3.5, I guess, would be more appropriate. Like, I don't know. This one, I just, it had so much potential to be a new favorite. And then I read the book You Shouldn't Have Come Here by Geneva Rose. And this is a new thriller that I listened to on audio. And if you watch my reading vlog, then you would know that this one didn't go super well for me. I think I'm giving this book 1 star. Like, I really just did not have a fun time listening to this one. And I just thought, oh my god, it was so ridiculous. And this book, what I did not really realize, I guess, going into it, is that it was going to be a lot more of a romantic thriller and romantic suspense as opposed to just like a regular thriller, because the premise of this one just says this girl rents an Airbnb that's like out in the middle of nowhere, and then this man, the guy who owns the house of the Airbnb, ends up being a little bit creepy. Like, that's all I really knew going into this. But what I didn't realize was that she was not only going to be like staying at his Airbnb, but like he was gonna be like living there with her while she was there. Like, I don't know why, I just didn't get that from the premise. Like, I didn't think that that was gonna be the situation happening. And so this book, it's like kind of like a romance, because this whole time it feels more like a romance, like the interactions between them. And even though he's kind of like giving a lot of red flags, she's not really like viewing it that way. She's just like, oh my god, like, he's so hot. And so it was just kind of frustrating to read from this protagonist's like point of view, because she was just kind of driving me nuts like this whole book. And there was just like such kind of like ridiculous and over the top drama and romance, and like there was like a love triangle situation that I just could not give 2 fucks about in this book. And then, you know, a lot of people said, oh well, the ending, like there's so many twists at the end. And so I was like, okay, like I decided to push through, you know, because I was gonna give this 1 star. Like, I was not enjoying it, not having fun. I really wish I hadn't, to be honest. Like, I wish I would have just DNF'd this, because what the fuck? What the fuck was that ending? Like, yeah, I guess there are a few twists you could say at the end, but the twist just felt so like ridiculous and like, what the fuck? Like, I don't know. I don't think that this author is for me. And then I read One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus. I finally ended up reading this one because I've been hearing so much about this book over the years. This one is a young adult thriller, and it's interesting because it's very like Breakfast Club vibes, you know, because we have a few students that are very kind of like stereotypical kind of things, because we have, you know, we have the brain, we have the beauty, the criminal, the athlete, and the outcast. And what ends up happening is this guy who's the outcast kid, he ends up dying during detention when it's just the 5 of them in that detention room. He ends up dying, and then it's weird because they find out the next day that he had originally planned to like spread gossip about all 4 of them, and he had like dirt on all 4 of them, and he was about to like post it to the school publicly. And so now they all 4 had reason to kill him, you know, because he was about to spread information about them. And so this story is really interesting because you're trying to figure out who could have killed him, because all 4 of them had, you know, reason and motive to do it. And this book, you know, sadly it ended up just being okay for me. I can definitely see the appeal with this one. I think if you're a huge fan of like 13 Reasons Why, I could definitely see you really enjoying this one. I think for me, the thing that kind of I didn't like that much about this one was that there was a lot of like young adult romance in this, which was just not my favorite thing. I was definitely more invested in some characters than in others. Like, for example, the one character, Cooper, like he was definitely the one that I was the most invested in his storyline, but all the other students, like I just didn't care as much about their storylines. But I do think this is better than like the average young adult thriller, you know, like I don't read a ton of young adult thrillers because most of the time I do find them to be pretty cringy, but I do think this is better than like most of the young adult thrillers that I've read. But for me, it was still about a 3-star. It was okay. And then I had another 3-star book this month, which was Begin Again by Emma Lord. And this is a book that I ended up reading because this is another one that I pulled out of my Patreon prompt jar. It was to read a book that like matched your outfit at the time, and I felt like Begin Again really did match my outfit at that time. And Begin Again was cute. It's about this young girl named Andy who is starting college, and there's quite a bit of romance in this book as well, and that was the thing that was just a little bit like, I don't know, I just couldn't get on board with the romance in this book. But I did really love the friendships in this book because this character has a really cute friend group in this book, as well as she has these grandmas who were like obsessed with Ryan Reynolds, and like that was so cute. Like I loved her grandmas in this book and her relationship with her grandmas, like that was absolutely adorable. But otherwise, you know, this one was just okay. I feel like Emma Lord, she usually is an author that I really like her young adult books, and so that's why I've read like Tweet Cute and like a few of her books now, I think. And then, you know, as I said earlier too, like this is the time of year in like April and like springtime when I get really in the mood to read young adult contemporaries. Like I don't know why that is, but sometimes that mood just hits. And so that's why I've been reading all of these like young adult books lately, even though they don't always end up being my favorite thing. I just love reading them to like pass the time. Like there's something so cozy to me sometimes about a young adult contemporary. And this one ended up being okay. It was a 3-star. It was nothing super memorable, and it was honestly kind of a forgettable book. But at the same time, I had a fun time reading it. It was really cute. And then the next book that I ended up reading this month was a romance book, and it was The Nanny by Lana Ferguson. And this one is a story about this woman who, she used to have this OnlyFans account, but she has since closed the account, and she's kind of like looking for a job, and she ends up getting this job nannying for this guy who's a chef, and he's like a single dad, and he has this daughter. And it's interesting because what they don't know is that he actually used to be signed up for her OnlyFans, but she like never showed her face, and so he never knew it was her. But then, you know, of course, she puts it together rather quickly that he was one of the guys that was on her OnlyFans. And so this story was so interesting. I will let you know that this is a romance book that you look at this cover and you think like, oh, look at how cute, and then it's like, oh shit. There's a lot of sex scenes in this book, and it is like very graphic sex scenes. I'm talking like Tessa Bailey, like to compare, okay, like if you have read Tessa Bailey books, then you probably know like how much sex is in Tessa Bailey books, and I would definitely compare this author to like that kind of style of romance, which is fine. Like I didn't dislike it, it's just I don't know if these kind of romance books are really for me, because usually when I read romance books, you know, I'm not reading romance books like for the smut. I'm usually reading romance books like for the cute relationship, you know? And this story, it's like, it gets to a point where there's just like, I think 50% of this book is probably just sex scenes, and it's fine. It's just, I don't know, I get so annoyed when romance books, like when it feels like the plot just isn't really going anywhere, and it's just like sex scene after sex scene after sex scene, especially when I'm listening to this on audio. I'm just like, oh my god, like there's something so much more embarrassing about listening to romance books like this on audio. But this one ended up being okay. I think I wanted to give this one like 3.5 stars because I really did like the romance that was happening between these two. I felt like they had a lot of chemistry between them, and the beginnings of this too, when it felt a little bit more forbidden, you know, because they are working together, like she's literally his nanny. And it was so cute though, like the bond that she had with his daughter, like it was just freaking cute at times, okay? And then the last book that I read this month was my booktube pick for the month of April, which is What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall. By now, the live show would have happened for the booktube, so I'll have the live show linked down below if you missed it. But if you missed the live show, you might have missed the fact that I think This book might have been 5 stars for me. Ooh! I'm still debating right now at the time that I'm filming this whether it was 5 stars or maybe like a 4.5, like high up there. But like, let's be real, this book was so fucking good. And I'm like so excited because I'm like, I've finally picked a good book for me for my book club. Because, you know, if you don't know, the torture of my own book club is the fact that I've never had a 5-star book for the booktube so far. Like, it's honestly kind of a joke at this point because I've had my book club for like over 2 years now and I still have not found a 5-star book. But I think I've finally broken the curse with this one because this book was fantastic. Okay, we're following this woman named Naomi, and when she was a young girl, when she was only 11 years old, she was out in the woods with her 2 best girlfriends, and then she was stabbed 17 times, but she survived it somehow, and she sent a man to prison who was like a serial killer. He was known in the area for killing all of these other women. You know, years and years later, I think it's like 20 years later, these women are in their 30s, and she finds out that this man has died in prison. Like, the guy that they sent to prison has died in prison, and now her friends are calling her up being like, we have to tell the truth about what really happened. And you're like, wait, bestie, what do you mean? And this story was just absolutely insane. It was so good. I don't know, there was just something about this book. I really, really loved the pacing of this book. I thought it was so, like, immediately engaging because there's so much already happening just in the beginning, like just in the first few pages of this book. I mean, gosh, the first sentence of this book just says, there is a wilderness in little girls. Isn't that like perfectly sets the freaking vibes, dude? Like, there's so many good scenes in this book where it's like girls in the woods, like thinking they're hearing noises and like running from danger. Like, oh my gosh, I just ate this shit up. Like, the vibes were immaculate. The atmosphere was so moody and intense. And then this book, oh my god, this book had some tricks up its sleeve at the end of this. Oh my gosh. I literally wrote down, okay, I wrote down a few different predictions. I was right about one of them. The rest of them, I did not see that shit coming at all. And I'm pretty sure this book had like 4 plot twists at the end of this book. Like, what in the Riley Sager? Like, I only say that because Riley Sager is usually the author that I know for being like the king of the double twist, you know? It's like there's always one thing that you saw coming and then a second thing that you didn't see coming. But I feel like with this book, there was so many twists at the end that I couldn't even keep track. I had to write down all the different twists, and I wrote down that there are 4 twists, and I was just so impressed. Like, even if the ending, even if it did get a little cheesy at times, like even if it did, and there was a few little like plot hole things that I noticed, but like I can't not give this 5 stars because of how much fun I had reading this book. I can really let the little things go sometimes, you know, because of just, it was just so good. It was so entertaining. It was so much fun. This is the kind of book that recharges my like love for reading thrillers, and I think that that's so great, and I'm so happy for myself that I finally had a 5-star read for the book troop. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read in the month of April. And you know, as I said, even though I didn't read as many books as I normally do in a month, and even though I did have a mostly mediocre reading month, like most of the books that I read were mediocre, but the books that I loved, I just absolutely fucking loved. I also, you know, ever since my reread of Fangirl, I've just been in such a mood to want to reread more of my favorites and then maybe make a video about annotating my favorite books. So let me know what you would think about that if you would like to see that. And of course, thank you so much for watching as always. If you've read any of the books that I read this month, then let me know what your thoughts are on them, and let me know how many books did you read in the month of April. What was the best book that you read in the month of April? Thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye!